Your subwoofer is probably not broken. That weak, boomy, muddy bass you are hearing right now is almost certainly not a hardware problem. It is a setup problem. And the frustrating part is that most people spend months assuming their subwoofer is just not good enough, when the real issue is sitting in a settings menu or in the physical position of the sub itself. Today we are going through every mistake that makes subwoofer both sound wrong, and more importantly, exactly how to fix each one without spending a single dollar on new equipment. Most people have no idea how much performance they are leaving on the table, simply because a few settings were never configured correctly after the initial installation. Before we get into it, drop a comment below telling me which subwoofer you are running right now and what your bass sounds like. Is it weak, boomy, muddy, or just disconnected from the rest of the system? I read every comment. And if this kind of practical setup content helps you, hit subscribe and leave a like. It genuinely helps this channel grow. The real problem, your setup, not your subwoofer. Let us start with the most important thing to understand going into this video. When bass sounds wrong, the instinct is to blame the hardware. The subwoofer is not powerful enough. The driver is too small. The enclosure is cheap. But in the vast majority of cases, the subwoofer itself is perfectly capable of producing great bass. It is just being held back by configuration errors that are incredibly common and surprisingly easy to fix once you know what to look for. This applies equally to budget subwoofers and premium ones. A Klipsch R8SW or a Bowers & Wilkins. ASW610 can both sound genuinely disappointing when the setup is wrong, and both can sound dramatically better once the correct adjustments are made. The hardware is only half the equation. The setup is the other half, and that is exactly what this video is going to fix. Think of it this way. You would not blame a car for poor performance if the tires were flat and the fuel mixture was wrong. The same logic applies here. Mistake 1. The double filtering problem. This is one of the most common and least understood mistakes in subwoofer setup, and it causes more muddy bass than almost anything else. Most powered subwoofers have a built-in low-pass crossover knob on the back panel. That knob is designed to filter out higher frequencies so the sub only reproduces bass. The problem is that most AV receivers also have their own bass management system that handles crossover filtering for the entire speaker system. When both are active at the same time, the subwoofer is being filtered twice, and the result is bass that sounds thick, slow, and poorly defined rather than tight and impactful. It is like trying to listen through two walls instead of one. The fix is simple. So set the subwoofer's built-in crossover knob to its maximum position, or to the LFE setting if your subwoofer has one. This effectively bypasses the sub's internal filter and hands full crossover control to the receiver where it belongs. Let the AV receiver manage bass. Do not let the subwoofer fight it. Once you make this single change, many people notice an immediate improvement in bass clarity without touching anything else. Mistake 2. The gain knob set. Wrong. The gain knob on a subwoofer controls its input sensitivity, not its volume in the way most people think. Setting it too high does not simply make bass louder in a useful way. What it actually does is force the receiver to trim the signal back aggressively to compensate during a calibration, which can increase distortion and make bass sound strained and unnatural at higher listening levels. Setting it too low means the sub never reaches its potential output, even when the receiver is pushing it hard. Either extreme creates a problem that calibration alone cannot fully solve. The practical starting point is to set the gain to roughly the halfway or moderate position before running your receiver's auto-calibration tab. They let the calibration system set the final output level from there. After calibration is complete, you can make small manual adjustments if needed, but the gain knob should be a starting point for calibration, not a substitute for it. A subwoofer like the SVSSB 3000R Evolution or the SVS PB3000ER Evolution includes app-based gain control that makes this process more precise, but the same principle applies regardless of the model you are using. Mistake 3. Phase is not checked. Phase is one of the most overlooked settings in subwoofer setup. And when it is wrong, the consequences are severe. If the subwoofer and your main speakers are out of phase with each other, their bass output partially cancels at the listening position. The result is bass that sounds thin, weak, and strangely absent, even though the subwoofer is clearly playing. Many people assume their subwoofer is underpowered when the real problem is a phase mismatch that is actively removing bass rather than adding it. This is one of those setup errors that makes a quality subwoofer sound like a broken one. The way to check phase is straightforward. Sit in your main listening position and play bass-heavy content at a consistent volume. Switch the phase setting on the subwoofer between 0 degrees and 180 degrees, and listen carefully at each setting. The correct phase is whichever position produces fuller, more present bass at the seat. Some subwoofers, including the REL S850, offer variable phase adjustment rather than just a 2-position switch, which allows even more precise alignment between the sub and the main speakers. Mistake 4. Speakers set to large. Inside your AV receiver's speaker configuration menu, every speaker in the system is set to either large or small. This large tells the receiver that the speaker can handle full-range audio, including deep bass frequencies. Small tells the receiver to redirect bass below the crossover point to the subwoofer. Many people leave front speakers set to large assuming it sounds better or more complete, but in most real-world setups, this creates bass management problems that make the entire system harder to integrate cleanly.
When front speakers are set to large, bass frequencies are being reproduced by both the main speakers and the subwoofer simultaneously without proper management. The result is often boomy, uncontrolled low end that varies dramatically depending on where you are sitting in the room. Set your speakers to small, set the crossover to around 80 Hz as a starting baseline, and let the subwoofer handle everything below that point cleanly and deliberately. This single setting change can transform how bass integrates with the rest of the system. Mistake 5. Placement is killing your bass. Even a premium subwoofer like the Wharfedale Pro T Sub AX15B cannot overcome a truly bad placement position. Room acoustics affect bass more dramatically than any other frequency range, and where you place the subwoofer determines how those acoustics interact with its output at your listening position. Bass is non-directional, but the room absolutely is not, and the room always has the final say. Placing a subwoofer directly in a corner tends to reinforce and amplify bass output, which sounds impressive at first, but often produces boomy, one-note bass that lacks definition and varies significantly across the room. Placing it in a dead spot or room null can make bass almost disappear at the listening position, regardless of how high the gain is set. The subwoofer crawl is a well-known method for finding the best position in a given room. Place the sub temporarily at the main listening seat, play bass-heavy content, then walk slowly around the room while listening for the position where bass sounds most even, tight, and natural. Place the subwoofer there permanently and run calibration again. Even moving the subwoofer just 1 or 2 feet from its original position can produce a surprising difference in how balanced and controlled the bass sounds at the main seat. The correct setup from start to finish. Here is the complete setup sequence that fixes every mistake covered in this video. Set the subwoofer crossover knob to maximum, or LFE, to hand bass management to the receiver. Set gain to a moderate starting position. Go into the receiver's speaker configuration and set all speakers to small. Set the crossover to 80 Hz as a baseline. Run auto calibration. Then check phase at the listening position and choose whichever setting produces fuller bass. Finally, if bass still feels uneven or room-dependent, experiment with subwoofer placement using the crawl method before making any further gain or crossover adjustments. Work through that sequence in order and do not skip steps. Each one builds on the last, and the result is bass that integrates naturally with the system rather than fighting against it. The goal through all of this is not more bass. It is better bass integration, where the subwoofer disappears into the system and you feel its contribution everywhere without ever being able to point at it as a separate box in the room. A good subwoofer should add weight and depth to everything you hear without ever drawing attention to itself. Here is the takeaway from everything in this video. A good subwoofer should disappear into the system, not call attention to itself. When bass sounds wrong, the answer is almost never a more expensive subwoofer. it is a correctly configured one. The crossover, the gain, the phase, the speaker size settings, and the placement position are all variables you control right now without spending anything. Fix those first, and your subwoofer will likely sound better than you ever thought it could. The difference between bad bass and great bass in most home theater setups is not money. It is attention to the details that most people skip. Drop a comment below telling me which of these mistakes was hiding in your setup. Hit like if this video helped, subscribe so you do not miss the next one, and I will see you there.